Okay, here's our 5.1 examples video, and I want to start by going over number 5 from the homework. And this is actually the only one I'm going to go over, because like I said in the concept video, all of these questions are exactly the same, or exactly the same type of question. All that's going to change is your demand equation and your supply function. If I look closely at what's given, I've got my demand function and I've got my supply function. If you were to graph those, you'd notice that your demand function has a negative slope, and I can actually see that because I'm minusing x. And my supply function has a positive slope. So notice the three things it's asking. First, I need to find the equilibrium point. And then I'll find consumer surplus and producer surplus at that equilibrium point. So let's focus on part A. How do I find this equilibrium point? Well, I can just set these two functions equal to each other. I get 7 minus x equals square root of x plus 5. What do I do with this? One of them has a square root, one of them doesn't. Well, let's get rid of that square root. It's not very pretty. Let's get rid of it. If I square one side, I have to square both sides. Squaring a square root will cancel it out. And so I'm left with x plus 5 on this side. And I've got this 7 minus x squared. Well, remember, if I've got subtraction inside of here, I can't distribute. I can't distribute that square to both terms. Instead, I can rewrite this as 7 minus x times 7 minus x. And then I can use that foiling method to get 49 minus 14x plus x squared. So now I have an x squared term as my highest term, meaning the only way I can solve this is to get everything onto one side, set it equal to 0, and see if I can factor. So that's what I'll do. I'll subtract x and I'll subtract 5 from this side. And I'm going to rearrange the order a little bit. I'm left with x squared minus 15x plus 44 equals 0. So now I can look at factoring this, and I think I just get x minus 11 times x minus 4, right? Negative 11 times negative 4 gives me positive 44, but negative 11 plus negative 4 gives me the negative 15. And that's perfect. I'm done factoring, and when I solve these, I get x equal to 4 and x is equal to 11. Oh, I have two answers. Which one's my equilibrium point? Well, come back up here to the actual problem, and this one's, number 5's unique from the rest of them, which is why I chose to go through this one, because it gives you a range of x values to look at. Where does that range come from? Well, it comes from your demand equation. If I have 7 minus x, if I plug in any number bigger than 7, you're going to get a negative value for your demand, and negative values don't make sense. We don't want negative price values. So that's why we're restricted to x values between 0 and 7, meaning 11 is too big. If I try and plug in 11, I get a price for my demand function that doesn't make any sense. That leaves me with only one option. My equilibrium point is at x equals 4. That's going to be my quantity that I'm going to use. It's not a price value, it's a quantity, because that's what we set x as. X is my quantity. So that means I'm now ready to calculate my consumer and producer surplus. Let's start with consumer surplus. Remember, I have a formula for this. Consumer surplus, CS, is equal to, with consumer surplus, I start with the integral. So I'm going to go 0 to q of my demand function minus price times quantity, right? The amount that the consumer is willing to pay minus what they're actually paying. But in our case, what's Q? Q is 4. 4 is the set amount of products that I'm going to produce. What's my demand equation? My demand equation is 7 minus x. Minus, okay, once again, I know what Q is. Q is 4. What's P? Remember, P is my corresponding price. So to get that, I'm just going to plug 4 into my demand equation. And I get 7 minus 4, which is just equal to 3. That tells me that the price I should sell it at is 3. And that's what I'll plug in for P. I'll go ahead and use my fundamental theorem of calculus. I'll find the antiderivative here. So I get 7x minus x squared over 2. That's going to be evaluated from 0 to 4. Minus 3 times 4 is just 12. So now I'll plug in my upper bound. 7 times 4 minus 4 squared over 2. Minus, then I'll plug in my lower bound. 7 times 0 minus 0 squared over 2. And then that's all going to be minus 12. Well, what do you notice about my lower bound? If I plug in 0 there, that whole thing just goes to 0. So I'm left with 28 minus 8 minus 12, which is equal to 8. And there's my consumer surplus. Consumer surplus is not really a unit attached to consumer surplus. It's just a measure of the customer satisfaction. Remember, the bigger that number, the more satisfied the customer is going to feel. The smaller that number, the less satisfied they'll feel. And in this case, my consumer surplus was 8. Okay, now let's try producer surplus. Producer surplus is the opposite. So producer surplus is the opposite. I'm going to start with my P times Q, and then I'll subtract off the area under the curve for my supply function. Okay, well now let's plug in the values for our function. My quantity was 4 still, right? That equilibrium point applies to both the supply function and the demand function. Same with that price that we found. The price is still going to be 3. And just to double check, you could plug this into your supply function and just make sure you get the same thing. My supply function is just the square root of x plus 5, so 4 plus 5. And I get the square root of 9, which is 3. I'm not going to worry about negative 3 because negative values don't make sense, so I'm going to default to positive 3. And that matches. That's the same amount that I got from my consumer demand function. So then I'm going to have the integral from 0 to 4 of my supply function. And now I'm ready to calculate this. 3 times 4 is just 12. This is where this gets a little tricky, because here I have a function inside of another function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually use integration by substitution. I'm going to let u equal x plus 5, and that means I need to get dx in terms of u. Well, what's the derivative of x plus 5? It's just 1. So that makes this a really easy substitution. But if I make this substitution, I do have to change my bounds. 0 plus 5 is 5. That's my new lower bound. And 4 plus 5 is 9. There's my new upper bound. And I get the square root of u du. Well, square root of u, that's not very helpful. I want to convert that to a power function. Square root of u is the same thing as u to the 1/2. And now I'm ready to integrate. Now I'm ready to find my antiderivative. So I get 12 minus the antiderivative of u to the 1/2 is u to the 3/2 over 3/2. I don't like dividing by fractions, so I'm going to switch this to multiplication. So this is the same thing as multiplying by 2/3. And that needs to be evaluated from 5 to 9. Now just be careful. Remember, that's the only thing that's evaluated from 5 to 9. Because that's my actual antiderivative. The 12 is still just left over from P times Q. So I'm left with 12 minus, I'm going to put big parentheses here. I'm going to plug in my upper bound. So 9 to the 3/2 minus 2/3 times 5 to the 3/2. This gives me 12 minus, and then still parentheses here, but 18 minus 5 to the 3/2 doesn't come out nicely. You could plug it into a calculator and get a decimal, but just be careful what Pearson's asking for. If it doesn't say anything about rounding, then it doesn't want you to round, and just keep it in an exact form, which is what I did. 2 times the square root of 125 over 3. And I could simplify this a little bit more just by distributing the minus and combining my like terms, and I get negative 6 plus 2 root 125 over 3. And that's my producer surplus. And that takes care of my problem. I found the producer surplus and I found the consumer surplus at this equilibrium point where my quantity was 4. All the rest of the problems on the homework all follow the same structure. So hopefully this will help you with the rest of them. But if you still have questions, of course, reach out and I'd be happy to help answer those. Good luck with the rest of the homework, and I'll see you in the next video.